So hi there, welcome to this new video. Today I have a special guest with me, Leah from the website and YouTube channel Leah English. Leah English, sorry. Hi Leah, how are
Hi
you?
everyone, I'm good, thanks.
Okay, great. So we'll cover different topics today, and in particular, Leah's best tips and tools to learn English, how to use traditional methods and paperback notebooks and let's say more traditional tools with other tools such as apps, videos, and podcasts. And then the biggest obstacles many English learners face according to Leah's experience. Okay, so before getting started, Leah, can you please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your language background, please?
Of course. So I'm French and I'm an English teacher. I've been teaching for 6-7 years maybe, and I'm also a polyglot. I speak multiple languages. I speak 5 languages on different levels. So there's English, obviously, Spanish, Norwegian, German, a little bit of Chinese. But I've transitioned from being the learner to being a teacher. And now I help my students more than I learn myself. But yes, I've been focusing on teaching more than learning, but I still try to still have one language that I'm learning just to remember how it feels to be a learner. So yes, I keep learning even today.
Okay, yeah, I think it's very useful, when you are a teacher to remember the struggles and
How it
the
feels.
difficulties, how it feels, because for example, today when you speak English and you are quite comfortable with it, you can forget that at the beginning it was very hard and you struggled a lot. So I like to put myself in the shoes of a learner from time to time, and of a beginner, because at the beginning it can be quite scary.
It's
Okay,
frustrating. Yeah,
great.
that's true.
And yeah. So you learn and teach languages in your daily life. So I'd like to know, what are your favorite tools to learn and teach languages?
Um, as so the languages that I will answer in two sections. So first, the tools that I'm using myself and I recommend to my students, and they are also tools that I recommend to beginners, to learners that I don't use myself because I speak English fluently. So with English, I like to listen to podcasts because it's a great way to do something and to soak in the language while you're doing something. So it's quite efficient. I also read books in English, non-fiction books for my business. So it's always a nice tool to use instead of learning something in French, which is my mother tongue. I prefer to read in English. I have to admit that I'm also a lot on Netflix, but it's a great excuse because it's learning. It's something useful. So there was podcasts, nonfiction books, Netflix, and I also like to write down like a gratitude journal, write down my goals and what happens during my day in English. So that's also, instead of doing it in French, I like to do this in English. And what I recommend to my students to use is so everything that I said before. Of course, Netflix, podcasts. I also spend a lot of time on YouTube, watching tutorials and motivational videos for everything. And I also recommend my students to watch TED conferences, to use apps like Mosalingua. I like also the app called Blinkist. You can listen to summaries of audiobooks in 20 minutes. So it's like more or less kind of a podcast, but you have the transcript. So, and yes, so yeah, there are the apps like, I don't know, Pimsleur. But I like to recommend my students from beginner to intermediate, upper intermediate, to also use apps that I mentioned before.
Okay, great. So many different tools, and I think it's nice to have some to have different tools for different skills, and also to have some variety so you don't get bored and so on. So it's more or less also what I do. learn, and also what I recommend. So we are on the same page. Okay, so and in yeah, so another question I have is about, you know, a notebook that you launched quite recently. So you launched this notebook to help people learn English, and I'd like to know because I know when I started, I was using notebooks, paperback methods, and so on. So I started like that, like 14 years ago, I think, something like that. And now, you know, there all these apps and online tools came. And so I'd like to know, why do you think that today is still a good idea to use a notebook, for example, or a paperback notebook?
All right, so I think a lot of paper methods are really old and traditional, and I think that for most of them, they struggle to be up to date and to change according to the way people are learning now. So maybe what you used 40 years ago hasn't changed that much now, and they don't take into account that now you have Netflix, you have YouTube, you have apps. So it's like either you use this method because you are really old-fashioned or old school, or you like to have something really structured, you like to learn grammar and stuff. But I don't think that most of the methods that are available are really suitable for people who like to be online and have a notebook. My feeling is that either you have the notebook and you follow what they say, or you use apps and online materials. So what I try to do is the notebook I have created is like a tool to combine like what you have online, what you can have on your phone, because it's great, and also have something physical you can use to for your English. I have a lot of students who have just a notebook, like a book, like a notebook without anything inside, but they write down words and sentences. And I think this is like, I shouldn't say that everyone should have one, but I think it's nice to have what you learn written somewhere on paper, because you can go back to it. You can maybe yes, you can read out loud. You can use different methods to memorize the words also. So I think having a notebook can be interesting. It doesn't work for everyone, but for some people it works. And as for paper methods, what I try to do with my book, and it's here, is for only French speakers, so that won't be interesting for everyone. But what I try to do with this is having something that will help you use apps, videos, audio content, and mix it into something like a paper method. So you have to listen to audio things, you have to watch videos because you need to hear the language. But having it on something on paper helps you to, yes, to put all these things together, kind of.
Okay. So you see like the starting point to create your own personal method to use different things. And yeah, if you want to give some examples how to combine traditional and more interactive methods, could you recommend?
Yes. So what I chose to do in my notebook, and you can of course do it with other tools. One idea here is what I have on each page. You have, I don't know if you know the prompt journals, like you have a question, and this is not just for learning English, it's just for like to be a better human being, better person. So you can buy prompt journals. Every day you have like, what are you proud of today, or what have you learned this week, what are your top 5 goals, so things like that. So what I like about this prompt journal thing is that it helps you to create the language, create sentences to speak, but an easier way, like you write down on paper what are your answers. And when you have apps, you watch videos and you listen to audio content, you will learn a lot of words and expressions. But if you never use them, you will forget them. So what I like is this prompt journal thing is it helps you to memorize and use what you learn. So that's a great way to, so you will listen to a podcast, you will use an app, you will learn vocabulary. And when you, in the evening, you answer your prompt journal question, you have to remember, so what expressions did I learn today, or what words did I learn last week or stuff. And you can use that on paper. So it helps you to memorize what you learn. So that's one way. And I think taking the time, sometimes you listen to content, you read books, and you're always looking for new information, and you don't take the time to look up the words you read the other day and didn't know the translation. So having a paper helps you to sometimes sit down and like collect all the words and sit for a second and try to remember what words you've learned this week. And maybe you were not sure about the definition, about how to use it. So that's also a great moment to stop and look up the words in the dictionary and just collect all the words in one place.
Okay, great. That's interesting. I always say that, we are all different and we need different tools, and you cannot learn a language with just one tool.
Of
So
course.
it's true that I think that, and I know some people who really like to use more traditional methods. For example, I sometimes I go to polyglot conferences, and I'm always surprised because many polyglots like to use more traditional methods, or to combine, at least to have among the tools they use also a more traditional methods, the ones that we were using a lot of time ago with the DVD or a book, and then you could listen to the dialogues and so on. So yeah, I really think that it's we are all different, and we can choose whatever we want. Also, because I don't know what is your experience, but do you also think that you should like the tools that you use, and it's one of the tips that you give to your students?
Of course. Because when you start learning a language, I always tell my students that the level you have now is the result of what you've done for the last 3 or 6 months. So if your English is not that good now, it's not because you will learn for 2 weeks that you will be great. So you have to wait to see the results. So if you start with a boring method or something you don't like or something that is stressful, you will not last and you won't see the results. So that one thing. And of course, you have to enjoy what you do. Otherwise, there will be self-doubt and you will always think I'm the person who is responsible for not having progress. And yeah, of course, if you don't enjoy what you're doing, you won't last more than a few weeks and you will stop, you will give up, and you will think that you are the problem, but the problem is the method you use. Because maybe, as you said, maybe it's not because the method is bad, it's just because you don't enjoy it. That's the problem.
Yeah.
So I think, yes, you have to enjoy what you, even if it's not that fun at first, like if you watch Peppa Pig because you're a beginner and you don't understand Netflix, but you can still enjoy it because you can recognize some words, and episodes after episode you start to understand better and better. So, but yes, it has to be fun, otherwise you will quit, I think, quickly.
Okay, and do you have a tip to be more patient? Because what you said really resonates. So I know that for some people it's very hard to wait for the results, because the results, well, of course you can see some quick results at the beginning because their learning curve is very quick. It's very quick. So when you're a true beginner, I think after 3 months you can really see a lot of results. But I know that sometimes some of the students have a lot of problems at one point when they have, for example, for the intermediate plateau, or even before, when they struggle to become to go from false beginner to intermediate. Do you have a tip for them?
Yes, I think so. What I tell them is always look back. So it's nice to have an objective. I want to be fluent. I want to speak like whatever Barack Obama has. But it's nice to just take stock of what you've done and remember where you were 6 months ago. So most of the time when we sit for a second and I'm not improving, it's slow, no. I think often it's fear, because they are still judging themselves. My accent is bad. I don't have time. They have all these excuses and they feel that they are plateauing. But the truth is that I think they are scared. They are at the level when they can start to speak to people. And sometimes saying I'm not improving is an excuse to not start speaking to people and be vulnerable. But I think it's important to look back. I often ask them, where were you like 6 months ago? And sometimes, yeah, my English was like really, really low. So that's one first thing. And the second is that you have to realize that it's a journey. That's stupid, but that's cliche, but it's true. I also thought that one day I will stop learning. It will be good. My English will be just good enough, but no, you never stop. That's the truth. So remember that if you think you're not improving, it will be, I mean, you will get frustrated all the time. Even now, today, I still have to improve. My English is not perfect. So one day I realized that there won't be any deadline, any finish line when I could say, no, I stop. No. So just remember that I won't tell you it's long, it takes time, because it's never ending. It's just enjoy the process, enjoy learning new words. Even if you learn one word and you're happy because you used it in a conversation, that's cool. And that's you are improving. So yes, realize that when you are intermediate, of course, it's not as fast as the beginning, because you learn so much new things within a short period of time because you knew nothing before. So it's going to be really slow, and like it's a long life journey. So enjoy the process.
Yeah, no, I think it's a great tip. It's like, well, I know that it's a metaphor that it's used all the time, but because it's true, it's like a journey, you know. So one of the best ways of enjoying your journey is to like the journey itself. So not just thinking all the time about the destination or the next thing to see. It's a very similar process. Okay, so as we said, you've been teaching English for many years. And I'd like to know, what are the biggest obstacles for the majorities of English students, according to you?
Yes, I just wrote them down here. Yeah, so one was obstacles, you said.
Yeah, obstacles. Yeah.
Yes. So yes. So surprisingly, with my experience, I thought that yes, people struggle with grammar, and maybe there were not that many effective methods out there. But then I realized that I think the most common obstacle was in the mind, like the mindset thing, because yes, English and any language is like words and grammar put together with pronunciation and comprehension. But when I tried to figure out what was the difference between polyglots and like other people who are not polyglots, I think the main difference is not like the method, the whatever, it's the mindset, is the limiting beliefs. Polyglots know that they will learn. If they succeeded for the first one, they will succeed for the second. Once you learn 3 languages, you know that you can learn any language you want if you take the time and you put the effort. But I think what's the biggest difference between a person who is struggling to learn English and like Steve Kaufman, who speaks whatever 20 languages, the biggest difference is like if you are constantly telling yourself like you're bad, your English is bad, French school it sucks, our pronunciation is bad, or I'm busy, I don't have time. You have all these excuses and all these fears, and I think that's the biggest obstacle, like shutting down all the fears in your head, and you will move much faster if you do that.
Okay, and it's something that I also observed. As I said, I often go to polyglot gatherings and so on, and so I also know that, you know, you don't have exceptional people over there, so they are they're so ordinary. Of course, they have some of them, they are brilliant, very, very clever, and so on. But the real difference as you said, it's the mindset, and also sometimes the time that they put into, because they like languages. So of course they
can spend hours.
Yeah, languages are part of their life, and they spend at least 1 hour per day learning languages. And so at the end of the day, if you have the mindset and then also the time, you spend time learning them, of course you will learn more easily and quickly. So because sometimes there is this impression that polyglots are like superheroes. They're smarter than other ones. And I also say that, look, they are ordinary people, so you have the very brilliant ones, you also have the ordinary ones, and the others that you say, you notice that they are, apart from speaking other languages, they are not very interesting and so on, like everyone. So it's normal people. I think it's the right definition.
Yes, and I think one key is that I read a quote the other day, was action beats perfection, and I think work beats talent. So if you're talented, yes, for some people it's easier. Maybe some people say that they struggle to hear certain sounds, so this can be true, but work beats talent. So I mean, everyone, even if you're talented, you can't learn a language by just sitting in China for 2 weeks. And what I was shocked, I remember when I was watching like polyglot videos about one is from South Africa, Lindy Bottas, something like that. I was shocked to see that she spent 2-3 hours or more sometimes working on something like on Korean and stuff. And I realized that I also told myself, yeah, they must have something special. There's a secret. It's easy for them. Like they start learning Chinese and 6 months after they speak Chinese. But when I saw her studying hard, I realized that, I mean, it's not a super talent, or it's not because she's genius. It's just because she puts in the work, she studies, and it takes time. I mean, for everyone.
Yeah, sure. And I really agree what you said, and with the quote you mentioned. And there are also many studies saying that, you know, work beats talent. For example, there is a very, it's very controversial, but there is a famous rule which is called the 10,000 rules.
Mm-hmm.
Because one a scientist studied that for so the top performer in any field are the ones who put a lot of efforts, and he calculated that you need like 10,000 hours to master any field, but to be like the top athlete, the top football player, and so on. Well, it was interpreted in a very controversial way, because what he said is not just that you need to study for 10,000 hours, but what he wanted to point out is that you need deliberate practice. So you need some practice where you are very focused on what you do, and also you have a kind of feedback to understand if you're progressing. So either an online system to monitor your progress, or maybe a tutor or something like that. And but just to tell that what he discovered, if we want to sum up, it's that top performers are not those who were born like that and they were like exceptional. Of course, there are some people who have some natural talents, but the top performers in any field like music, sport, and so on, were the ones who worked a lot to go there. And even even Mozart, for example, it's true that it was a genius, but it's also a person that until 20 years old, he was 20 years old, he played piano and practiced music, so creating music for so many years, because he was exposed to that for so many years. That so I when he was 20 years old, for example, he had a lot of practice, probably more than 10,000 hours and so on. So it's really something true. But I want to precise that to master a language or to speak very well of a language, you don't need so many hours. No. Because it was just an example, sure. Just to say that it's something that it's really it's really true that work and practices beats talent all the time. Okay, great. So interesting insights. Okay, and another question I'd like to ask is, if you had to give only 3 tips to a friend willing to master English, what would you suggest to do? Only 3 things.
So I try to find tips that would work for beginners, intermediate, and more. So as we said, mindset first, because if I give you like work on, as you say, different methods will work with different people. There are things that work better than others, but yeah, everyone will learn kind of differently. So I think one thing that is in common is that when you learn and you are seeking for advice, you're seeking, well, you need a teacher, and you're watching this type of videos, It's probably because you need you need help. You're not a self-learner as some polyglots. So I think working on your mindset is really important, because if you learn but you keep telling yourself, I don't have time, I'm too busy, my English is bad, I don't understand what people say. If you have these limiting beliefs, it's like tango, you're going 2 steps further and then 2 or 3 backwards, because you're thinking negatively in your head. And it's not because you learn a lot of things that you will dare to speak, because if you're too afraid. So I would say that learning a language has to go with like working on your mindset, like allowing yourself to make mistakes. It's not like stop thinking that people will judge you. Try to like embrace failure. It's not bad. Stop saying excuse me when you make a mistake. It's fine. I mean, I make mistakes too. So I think working on your mindset is the first thing, because it's something that we all overlook. We think that it's just grammar and words to learn, and that's it. And a language is much more than that. So I would say work on your mindset. We said that before, but I think it has to be fun. If it's a struggle, if you think that it should be like learning irregular verbs by heart, no, it can be fun. Like even watching Netflix counts like learning. So some of my students are like, yeah, I watch Netflix, but they feel guilty because they think it's not hard enough. It can be fun, it can be easy, no problem. So if you find something you enjoy, some apps, listening to a podcast, or reading a book, it counts like learning English. It doesn't have to be a grammar textbook. So it has to be fun if you want to, because it's a journey. I mean, so it has to be fun if you want to continue. And the last advice would be, so if you think that you are plateauing or you're not improving, so I would suggest changing for a new method, for a new app, try to do something different. Because if you do what you've always done, you will get what you've always got. So if you were a beginner relying on easy apps and Peppa Pig, for example, cartoons, maybe it's time to transition for something else. And if you feel that you're not improving, or you wanted to learn a new language but it's not working, maybe try another method. So yes, I would suggest, if you failed in the past to learn one language, try to switch to another resource. Or if you feel that you don't make progress anymore, just try to find something else.
Okay, great. And 3 great tips. I really like the fact that you mentioned the mindset, because something which is so important. And I have the impression, I don't know how it is today, but I had the impression when I was at school, when I was a student, that it was so neglected, and nobody was talking about the fear of making mistakes, the perfectionism, or I don't know, the fact that you think you're not capable of speaking, and the other people who are fluent in English are maybe gifted or more talented, and they lived, I don't know, 10 years in the States, so that's why they speak English. And so the psychological aspect is so important. And sometimes when they ask why, what is different in your method, in Mosalingua method, for example, I say, look, one of the things is that the psychological part, and let's say also the self-development part, as you said, improving yourself, the mindset and so on, it's part of the method. Because I can feel that every day. So people who have a good level, students who are quite good actually, but especially the speaking barrier. So the barrier when they have to open the mouth and speak, I think that you're seeing that all the time. And it's such a big barrier. And sometimes with some work, a couple of weeks, explain that you don't have to be afraid. It's okay to make mistakes, or even giving them some tools to say, okay, learn some set phrases to say, can you repeat? Can you speak more slowly? And also understand that people are nice. So even if you're talking with a native speaker, it's not the end of the world if they are, they don't understand, or maybe you don't have the words to express with your thoughts, and so on. I don't know, how were your first conversations? Do you remember? Were you scared with to speak English?
Of course. I mean, no, I would actually. So, I mean, I would say the first.
You're a brave woman.
Yeah, I mean, yes, but you will listen to the whole story. It's crazy. So, when I was in high school, so I learned English first at school, like everyone in France. So 7-ish years. And I cannot say that I had conversation. So my first conversation was when I had this exam at the end of the year, like baccalaureate, and I had to present something. So it was not really a conversation. So I had to say my text like by heart. That was it. And then I moved to Norway. And so I hadn't had any conversation with real people. It was just in class, you raise your hand, you say something. And there, I was 20 years old. I went there and I started to talk to teenagers. I was 20, they were, I don't know, 15, 12, I don't know, they were young. And I started to speak. Oh my gosh, I started to make mistakes. I said, I remember the sentence, the first sentence I said was, I didn't went. I was like, oh my gosh, that's stupid. Didn't went. This is not correct. It's not grammar. And the kid in front, because he was a kid, he started to speak so fluently, easily, and I just shut down because I was so ashamed, and I couldn't speak because I thought I was good because I had good grades in school. I was like super confident. Yeah, my English is so cool. And then I went there and I couldn't speak. I was so afraid. I was ashamed, and I realized that the accent was so good. And a kid that was 10 years younger than me, almost, spoke better. In my head, he spoke better. Maybe it wasn't true, but so I was just shocked, and I decided to start learning Norwegian because I would feel less ashamed to speak a language I was learning than English.
Okay.
So crazy. So yes, I totally understand that people feel stressed because I've been there too.
Okay, and also speaking about mindset, I think that when you meet someone who is, for example, it was the same for me. I think my first conversation were in the Netherlands. I went to Amsterdam, and the real conversations, because as you said, I was speaking at school, even if my teacher was correcting me all the time. So it was like, okay, I don't want to speak anymore because you're correcting me all the time. And yeah, but I observed that Dutch people were very comfortable with English, and at some point I realized that, okay, I think it's not when you see someone who is good at something, you can have two reactions. So the bad reaction is to say, oh, I'll never got there, it's so good, and I'll never get there. Sorry, I'll never get there, it's so difficult, it will take ages or years to get there. Or you have the other one to say, like, you see the final result and you use them as inspiration. And I think in terms of mindset, it's what I did. I said, but I'm sure they don't have anything something special.
The whole country speaks good English, so they cannot be all talented.
It's not just one guy. And I start speaking with the guy was like aged like my father. So he was at the time, I think 50, something like that. And my father could not speak English. So I said, okay, but everyone is speaking, so I'm sure something I can do. And this is the final result. So all the time I was I was remembering the final result, and it was like an inspiration. So once again, the mindset, let's use the good example in the right way, like an inspiration or the final result that we can reach, and not like something, oh, okay, no, he's better than me, I will never get there. And that's so important, I think. Okay, great. Thank you very much. It was nice to see also that we share a lot of opinions and views about learning languages. So the final question is where people can find more information about what you do, your work, and so on.
So my name on YouTube and my website is Lea English. So if you type that on Google, you will find either. So, and I'm also on Instagram, the same, Lea English.
Okay, very very easy to remember. short name with a plus English. Yes. Okay, great. So thank you very much for this conversation, and yeah, see you soon, and happy learning to anyone. So I hope that you liked that you liked the video, and as always, as we always say, if you like the interview and the conversation with Lea, please subscribe and look for her name and so on. And so see you soon. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you, Leah.
If you learned something new from this video, give it a thumbs up. Then, hit subscribe and turn on your notifications. Have a look around our channel for more hacks and tips. And if you're watching on another social media platform, like or follow our page. See you next time.